Alright, 0.3, geometry. Let's talk about the Pythagorean theorem. In every right triangle, you could take one of the sides A, one of the sides B, square them and add them together, and it will always equal the hypotenuse, or the longer side, the diagonal side, squared. That's where we get A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So check it out. Here's an example. I have this side is 5, this side is 12, and I don't know what this side is. So what I can do is I can take 5, square it, take 12, square it, add it together, and I know that's going to equal my C, the diagonal, squared. Alright, well, let's see what we get here. 5 squared, well, that's 25. 12 squared, well, that's 144, equals C squared. 25 plus 144, that's 169, equals C squared. When you want to get C all by itself, you take the square root, and square root of 169 is 13. It's actually plus or minus 13. And the square root of C squared is just C. Well, since we're dealing with a side here, it can't be negative, so we know that C equals 13. Bam, done. That's how we use the Pythagorean theorem. So, I want you guys to do the same thing. Right here, you got a side of 3, a side of 4. What's the third side? Go ahead and do it, and in just a, you may want to pause the video because in just a second I'll put the answer up there. Alright, 3 squared plus 4 squared equals C squared. 3 squared is 9, plus 4 squared is 16. C equals C squared. 9 plus 16 is 25. Take the square root, and you get that C has to equal 5. It's 5. And that leads me to my next point, is that there are these things called triples that you should just memorize. These are things that just always work perfectly. So 3, 4, 5 is one of them, 6, 8, 10 is one of them, and 5, 12, 13 is one of them. Notice here we had a 5, 12, 13, and here we had a 3, 4, 5. I could have put a 6, 8, and then that would have been 10 as well, and that would have worked just fine. These are ones that you're just going to want to memorize. So memorize 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, and 5, 12, 13. Save you a lot of work later on. Okay, let's go over to the other side now. Alright, now we're going to talk about the distance formula. Let's say you have 2 points, A, x1 and y1, and B, x2, y2. How could you find the distance between these points? So let's just say that this is point B, and right, it's x2, comma y2. And let's say this is point A over here, and it is x1, y1. I'm just calling them x2, y2, and x1, y1 because we don't know what they are. And we want to figure out what that distance is. Let's see if I can draw a line somewhat straight here. We want to find out what that is. Well, there's a little nifty trick we can do here. We could actually draw a line straight down. And we can draw a line straight left to right here. And now we have a right triangle. And so if we could find this distance A and this distance B, and we could call this distance C, we should be able to find it. Well, this point here, we can find that point because, think about it, the x doesn't change when we go straight down, so the x here has to still just be x2. And the y doesn't change when we go straight over, so the y's got to be the same thing, which is y1. So now we have those points. Okay, well, if the x's don't change, only thing that changes is the y's. So this A is equal to y2 minus y1. It's equal to the top height minus the bottom height. That's how we can get this A. And similarly, this B here is equal to x2 minus x1, or the difference from x2 to x1. So we could say B equals x2 minus x1. Okay. And now we know, right? We know that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And now my a, we know, is going to be y2 minus y1. So we'll just plug that in, square it. Plus my b now, right, over here is x2 minus x1. So plug that in, square it. And instead of c here, let's just call it d for distance, because that's what we're doing. So we'll say that equals d squared. Well, one more thing here. If I wanted to get d all by itself, I would take the square root of this side and the square root of that side. Well, this would cancel out these two things, and I'd be left with just d equals the square root of, and it doesn't really matter if you put the x's or y's first. We can switch this around because adding is commutative, but typically we put the x's first. x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is actually the distance formula. That's what we got the distance formula from. So down here, that's how we get the distance formula. We're going to write x2 minus x1, y2 minus y1. Alright, so the last thing we're going to do here is we're going to practice using the distance formula. So what I like to do is I like to just label things right away. So let's call this x1, y1, x2, y2. Okay. Well, now that we have things labeled, my 8 is x1, 5 is y1, and 4 is x2, 1 is y2, we can plug it into that formula. So let's just rewrite the whole formula. D equals the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus, that's a y2 minus y1 squared. Okay. So that means when I start plugging things in, we get d equals the square root. What's my x2? Well, it's 4. My x1 is 8. Square it plus, what's my y2? 1 minus my y1, which is 5. Square it. 4 minus 8 is negative 4 squared, plus 1 minus 5 is also negative 4 squared. Okay. Negative 4 squared is still positive 16, so these are both positive 16, and then we have 16 plus 16, which is 32. And we already learned how to factor this down, so what goes into 32? We got a 4 and an 8, and then another 4 and a 2. Circle my 4, box my 2, so d equals 4 square root 2. Bam. And that's how we use the distance formula. Go ahead and use practice number 2 here. Try it on your own and see what you get for the distance between these 2 points. Don't forget to label. Alright, go ahead and try it. I'll put the answer up in just a second. Okay, should have gotten 5. Let me just show you how real quick. When you plug everything in, you should have gotten 4 minus 7 squared plus negative 3 minus negative 7 squared. 4 minus 7 is negative 3. And negative 3 minus negative 7, you could kind of turn that into a plus sign because it's a negative and a negative. So negative 3 and positive 7 just makes positive 4 squared. Negative 3 squared is 9. 4 squared is 16. So you got a 9 plus 16. This should start to look familiar. 9 plus 16 is 25. And the square root of 25 is 5. So that's how we got that answer. All right. That's it for these notes. Thanks. Adios.